Welcome to Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Tonight, just days before the election, we look beyond the issues at hope and fear. Two distinguished thinkers join us, psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton and Princeton professor Eddie Glaude. Also tonight, the mathematics of voter fraud and voter turnout.
I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now.
But first, our online video picks for the week of the 2008 election. Number one, I'll bet you didn't know that New York Senator Chuck Schumer was on the ballot in Kentucky.
This is Charles Schumer, the far-left senator from New York. He wants to pick Kentucky's next U.S. senator. How? You've already seen hundreds of ads by radical groups attacking Mitch McConnell. Guess who's helping them make them? It's Schumer, a leader of these outside groups. Schumer's pledged to spend big bucks to make you vote the way he wants. So, how does Schumer vote? Bada bing, bada boom. He votes for amnesty for illegal aliens, even convicted felons, and against requiring a photo ID to vote. And Schumer supported the vicious personal attack that called a four-star general a traitor. Schumer also proposed spending $1 million of your tax dollars to open a hippie museum in New York.
I'm only surprised they didn't cast Charles Rangel for that video. And notice it never mentioned McConnell's actual opponent. Democrat Bruce Lunsford is his name. Election week video pick number two. If you're an Obama supporter feeling very confident about your chances about now, you better watch this from MC Yogi called A Poem for the Youth Voter.
Okay, people, we really got our sights on it. Bottom of the ninth, 2 outs and 2 strikes on it. But we need to keep focused and be patient. Do not get complacent. Stop your celebration. Because if this game was fair, they wouldn't call it politics. And the Mavericks could still pull off a lot of tricks. This other team is well known to cheat. So do you really think that history won't repeat at the sweetest moment when we're just about to seal the deal and it's so close that we can feel it? That's when they always try to steal it. Because history shows that young voters never turn out. So they're hoping that all your passion's about to burn out. They're hoping you believe the hype and think it's over and spend election day on the sofa watching Oprah. So before you let your vision start getting clouded, listen to this and think really hard about it. Imagine that one day your kids want to ask you, where were you when this moment in history passed you? And we have to tell our daughters and all our sons, we stayed home on the day Obama almost won. Imagine telling them we had it in our hands and we could taste it. After all those years, our ancestors chased it. Finally, we had one chance and it was wasted because you spent the day playing Madden in the basement. How you think you're gonna feel getting stuck in that role? You're gonna feel like a motherfucker. So let's make a plan that we won't let them try to knock it out of our hands like Leon Lett. We're good, but we're not beyond threats. They can still pull a fast one. The only poll that counts is the last one. We need to show the clowns we can last 12 rounds. Stand firm, hold it down till the last bell sounds. So when that day comes and you address your kids, we can look down with pride and say, yes, we did.
Enough said, right? From MC Yogi. Election week video pick number three. Forget about Obama or McCain. From adgabber.com, how about Mos Def for president?
Thank you for your vote. Thank you for choosing me. Mos Def is your president. I'm just going to lay down some basic rules. Number one, universal health care, education, and housing. Read a book. It's free. Go fix your teeth. Go get that lumbar checked out. You too can have a beautiful smile, perfect posture, and a warm bed to sleep in. Why not? You're an American. You deserve it. Flat tax, 10% for everybody. That's it. We don't need any more of your dough. How about that? How about 90% of that money is yours? High fives at an all-time high. I know they are. Mandatory community service for athletes and people who make over $500,000 a year. Mandatory, or the tax goes up for you. Mr. I don't feel like it today. Mr. Rolls Royce, Maybach. Oh, you don't want to feed them hungry kids? Well, we gonna put 20% tax on you. Mandatory. You have more, you should do more. Free breakfast for all of the kids everywhere. If I was president, America would be cool again, for real.
Well, maybe in 2012 or 2016. Election week video pick number four from the American News Project. This is a scene they captured at an actual rally for John McCain where someone was spreading hate and other supporters, including a campaign worker, confront him.
I'm here as a journalist, and I'm asking you, what is the Islamic Crescent supposed to represent?
I want people to ask the question about what about his connections with Islam.
Are you a Muslim, ma'am?
I am Muslim.
Here you go. Sir, this woman's a Muslim.
Islam with the Soviet Union flag.
That is just wrong.
Yeah, because...
You know what? That just made me change my mind. That's just wrong.
Okay.
Are you Muslim, man? Are you Turkish?
No, I'm Kurdish.
Kurdish?
I'm Dan Zuberi. I'm one of the campaign chairs. I'm Muslim. I'm chairman of the Maryland campaign. I was an elected McCain delegate. Yeah, but he's not with the campaign, so you don't have to worry. I'm with the campaign, and we don't endorse that behavior. So
You don't endorse this man's behavior?
No.
The McCain campaign doesn't endorse your behavior, sir.
I'm pro-McCain. You know that there
But you're
are some parts...
anti-Islam.
I'm
And
not...
that's not what our Constitution's about. You're here
I am
being
pro-freedom.
anti-Islam, but you're complaining against people in Muslim countries being against Christianity. You don't believe in the Constitution.
Absolutely.
No, you don't. You wouldn't put that on there if you did.
You can be of any religion and be
I know.
for McCain.
Thank you.
I'm a
Say that
Muslim
again,
for
sir.
McCain.
You can be
I
of
was
any
in-
religion and be
I ran for the United States
somewhere.
Congress, and I was endorsed by John McCain.
I don't think it's in any way a bad thing to question Barack Obama's ties, but we need to do that in a respectful manner. And I mean, you're making the point about Islam, which is an excellent point with regards to extremist Islam.
And election week video pick number 5. Call this a tale of two McCains.
My grandfather, Weston McCain, always told us that our slave name was Levenham. He said, always remember your slave name was Levenham. And your name now is McCain because my grandfather was purchased as a slave.
In Carroll County, Mississippi, the name McCain has been legend for 150 years. Two McCain brothers bought 2,000 acres of prime land here in 1851. They grew rich from cotton and slaves and started large families. Eventually, that grew into an unparalleled military tradition. McCain men became generals and admirals in World War II and during the Vietnam War. The last of those admirals gave birth to John McCain, who became a war hero, a U.S. Senator, and is now the Republican nominee for president. But in the last 50 years, here in Carroll County, the McCain name has stood for something else.
Most people hear McCain because so many people knew my father. It was like you didn't have to say anything else.
It was a family of McCains who resisted the Ku Klux Klan, led the civil rights movement and voter registration efforts in the 1960s, who integrated public schools and changed this part of Mississippi forever. Those McCains are African American descendants of the slaves owned 150 years ago by the white ancestors of Senator John McCain.
So as we divide up into red and blue for Election Day, who knows? Maybe we're all related. And that's our election week video picks. Don't fail to vote. This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Election Day is almost here. Americans will pull the lever for Barack Obama or John McCain. We like to think the choice is about issues, rational stuff like the economy, war, health care. But is voting mostly irrational, about fear and hope? What's going on under the surface? To help us think about this, Princeton professor of religion and African American studies, Eddie Glaude, and via video cam, psychiatrist and historian Dr. Robert J. Lifton, who's on Cape Cod. Eddie Glaude, welcome.
It's so a pleasure to be here with you.
And Robert J. Lifton, thank you very much for joining us from your home on the Cape.
Happy to be with you.
And let's talk about this moment in America, not in terms of electoral votes, but in terms of hope and fear and values. Professor Glaude, is this a time of particular hope in America?
I think so. But hope is always connected to some sense of fear, some sense of trepidation, right? You have to hope, as the great Du Bois said, you hope against hope in some significant way, a hope that is unhopeful but not hopeless, particularly in a country that's been defined by so much darkness in so many ways. So I think the election in some significant way is about this moment of transition, a moment of transition that is filled with excitement and possibility, but also the unknown. And given that the unknown is so much a part of this moment, there's fear, and the flip side, of course, is hope. So yes, both.
Do you agree, Dr. Lifton? And what is that hope?
I do agree, and you could call it a kind of psychohistorical turning point. Something new is happening. Even to have a black candidate likely to become president is a radical new event in this country, and it occurs at a time of American descent into its lowest moral and political evaluation in the world that one can remember. So there's hope for a return to some American decency and emergence from what I call superpower syndrome, a kind of claim to omnipotence. And it's done together with the emergence of an extraordinary black candidate who has the potential qualities of a great man.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an ironic moment. I mean, in some ways, what we're witnessing is the crisis in confidence in the American myth. This is supposed to be the Redeemer nation.
Crisis, no, let me stop you. That's such a concept. A crisis of confidence in the American myth.
Right.
Which American myth?
Oh, that myth that we are a Redeemer nation, that this is the city on the hill, as Reagan would call it, the shining city on the hill, that our position in the world is a result of this journey from the old world to the new. America is the new Canaan land, right? And we are imagined as a space, a site that's sanctioned by God. And that particular orientation has defined this kind of progressive understanding of America's march to the future. And here we are for the first time, I think, in the history of our status as a superpower, experiencing in some significant way the inability of our myth to account for our circumstances, because the myth has to work in the context of actual material decline.
So we get, Dr. Lifton, from the hope to the fear.
Well, there's lots of fear. The whole superpower syndrome that we've been embedded in is surrounded by fear and runs on fear, because with the last 8 years, and really in some degree ever since World War II, America has emerged as a dominant country with an increasing and especially recent sense of entitlement to control historical events. So there's some profound need, without everybody understanding all this, for a radical shift. And that's why the electorate has been so responsive to the idea of change. There's a widespread sense that something is profoundly wrong, along with a hope that it can be changed. And I think that American myth is now, in a sense, ambivalent. There is a sense that America has failed the world, and yet there's always some expectation that American possibility and the capacity of America for some new way, some decency will reemerge. And it's all embedded at this moment. It's an extraordinary moment to live through.
But isn't it ironic that we turn to a black man in the midst of that?
It is ironic.
Why?
But it's ironic, and yet there's something moving about it and something right about it. The blacks in this country have been what I call a designated victim, parallel to what Jews have been in Europe in some degree. And in the case of blacks in this country, they've been enormously followed as, as entertainers or athletes, but to have leaders who lead not only on black issues, but help with profound American and international issues. This is a new moment, and it's appropriate in some holistic American way that it be this way.
Were you surprised, were even you surprised during the debates and since the financial crisis really hit on September 15th, that it's Obama, the black man, who has been seen by more Americans apparently as the steady, reassuring hand, while McCain has been seen as the erratic one?
Yeah, I was surprised. But I mean, I've been surprised by this whole 21-month saga, this whole 21-month journey. It's a testament to Barack Obama's genius as a politician, the extraordinary nature of his campaign. He's transformed the very nature of national politics. But I've been struck by this turn by the nation to Obama as a kind of vessel, an embodiment of American possibility. So in this moment of decline, in this moment of deep-seated fear about the possibility of America's future, right, there's a turn to this African American, when African Americans have historically imagined America not so much as Canaan land, but as Egypt. The White House was the home of Pharaoh. So the Exodus metaphor within the context of African American history has always been inverted. So it's doubly ironic for Obama to be viewed as the steady, rational one, while McCain is viewed as the emotional, erratic one in this moment. So
what I'm hearing from the two of you is really incredible, because you were just saying, out of our new fears and vulnerabilities come a new hope. Dr. Lifton, you were saying before, I think, that out of our status as a superpower for these last 50, 60 years came a certain vulnerability or a lack of tolerance for any vulnerability. So well, with that invincibility came fear.
And the two merge, but I think this issue of, in a sense, it's almost been lost, but it's important to restate. Emerging from the syndrome of being an omnipotent superpower becomes absolutely crucial at this point, because being a superpower in this claim to control historical events is a heavy burden for the American people, and it's replete with fear. There's a great irony that the most powerful country in the world has been, over the last decade, the most fearful, because it's a claim of total invulnerability, which is ridiculous since it's the nature of human life to be vulnerable. So all this is at play. And in terms of that even hand that Obama has shown, I think it's gradually dawned upon the American people, well before this economic crisis, that this man has a certain steadiness, and that his opponent has a lack of that steadiness and is much more unpredictable and unreliable. So the idea, the concept of the steady black man to lead us has gradually grown on us, and it comes to transcend color for a significant part of the population. So, having said that, there's still a lot of hate and a lot of fear, but the degree to which color is being transcended is powerful and important.
So I want to show a couple of videos that are examples of how the McCain campaign is using our fears to try to ratchet up doubts about Obama. Let's watch a recent McCain attack video, one that features the words of Joe Biden.
Listen to Joe Biden talking about what electing Barack Obama will mean.
Mark my words, it will not be 6 months before the world tests Barack Obama. The world is looking. We're going to have an international crisis to test the mettle of this guy. I guarantee you it's going to happen.
It doesn't have to happen. Vote McCain.
I'm John McCain. I approve this message.
So that spot seems to be promoting fear of, well, what exactly, Professor Lifton? The unknown in some way.
Yeah, well, it's juxtaposing an all-reliable, older, experienced John McCain with a younger unknown whom you can't trust. But you have to realize that the campaign has gone further than that and has tried to place Obama in a position of the other. He's not quite an American. He's not one of us. He's something alien outside of our community. And that's becoming close to a non-person. And that kind of person you can't rely upon. So underneath that ad, as bad as it is something even a bit uglier. And that's the problem with the McCain campaign, because much of it has been an invitation not only to rejection but to potential violence in this society.
If you're an Obama supporter, you must have wanted to shake Joe Biden after he spoke those words about Obama inviting some kind of military test or a foreign affairs crisis test just by virtue of his youth and inexperience.
Yeah, and Obama slightly slapped Biden's hand, I think, afterwards by saying he's prone to exaggeration. I think that's not those aren't the exact words, but there was a response within the
way of wriggling out of it.
Exactly. But you know what's so striking about this, though, to my mind, is this sense that the nation is in transition, that the nation is in decline, and we have to understand any society any community that feels that its way of life is under threat oftentimes retreat into nativism, and they engage in scapegoating. The ugliness of the soul bears itself, makes itself explicit when some folk believe that their way of life is being challenged. And America has a long tradition of ugliness in the face of implicit and explicit challenge. So what we see here are people, the McCain camp, appealing to kind of the base sense, and a base sense that has been expressed in very ugly and terrible ways in America's past and present, in some way.
And in case you've forgotten what's at stake in this election, here is Fred Thompson to remind you in our second video.
You got a few minutes? It's time for those of us who are concerned about our nation's future to focus on what's at stake in this year's elections. This is a time of great challenge for our country. We know that somewhere in the world our worst enemies either have or are trying to get their hands on the most dangerous weapons known to man. Small rogue nations are developing nuclear weapons and threatening our allies. Large nations are engaged in massive military buildups. At home, we're girding for the possible onset of a recession. Now, if this wasn't America, I might be worried. But very soon, we'll go to the polls and set a path that will determine how we respond to these challenges.
All right, once again, playing on our fears. In this case, John McCain becomes the hope. I mean, I get it's legitimate, isn't it, for campaigns to use fear? Or when is it legitimate and when is it not, in your opinion?
Well, you know, politics is politics, right? And so they're going to use what they use, and to appeal to people's fears and hopes as a way of garnering their vote. We should be used to that. But part of what makes this especially difficult is not only the moment we find ourselves in as a nation. So much is at stake. It's also Obama's presence. Obama's presence. So when we have these kind of tropes that are traditional to the political process deployed in this context with this particular adversary, right, it's experienced and understood at a different register. And so I think this idea of Obama as an other, a wholly other, who's inexperienced, so they're proxies for an interesting sorts of ways of talking about how different he is from us and how we can't entrust him, right, with the reins of the nation. And so these sorts of things that we should be used to, particularly from the Republican side of the aisle, it's experienced and encountered at a different register because of who the Democratic nominee is.
So, Robert J. Lifton, is this now a time of changing values in America?
Mm-hmm. It's a time of profoundly changing values. I think you reach a certain moment of psychology and history that looks like a radical shift, but it has to be prepared for. So things have been happening that we haven't been hearing about of a positive nature, in which there has been an emergence of a black middle class, of black intellectuals. Americans of all kinds have been re-examining their views, and the shift has been occurring. And one very interesting aspect that is very hopeful in all this is that what Obama offers is inclusiveness. Of course, he answers attacks, as he has to, with a certain toughness, but he answers finally with a promise or an invitation to inclusiveness. Let's do this together. Let's try to be an overall single united nation. Now, that's never going to be achieved in some perfect way, harmoniously to a T, but the invitation dampens the potential for extreme nativism or even violence, and offers some coming together at a time when there's great fear. There's great fear of, as we were both saying, of the unknown and of this really unprecedented moment.
So, Eddie Glaude, if a black man is going to be the father figure offering this notion of inclusiveness, does he have to do it in a different way from a white man, from how a white man would?
Well, he certainly can't mark his blackness. Right, so Obama has been running a brilliant race-neutral campaign. He can't be angry. He's the Jackie Robinson of American politics. He can't show any sense of resentment, any sense of connectedness, because remember, if he becomes the black candidate, he can't be representative of America as such, because black candidates can only represent black communities. But what's interesting about the changes on the ground, I heard a young man in San Francisco say this. He said, I'm no longer seen. If Obama's elected president, I will no longer be seen in the same way.
Do you think that's true for you?
No. Right? But the symbology, the symbolic significance of an Obama presidency, right, is really, really unimaginable.
What does that person mean?
I think he meant, right, that, I mean, it doubles in interesting sorts of ways, Brian. That is to say, on the one hand, right, possibility. He's actually not constrained by his color, because there's a person of light color who's in the White House. But in another sense, though, his predicament might become even more invisible. How can black suffering speak now in the public domain when we have a black president, right? That's the one thing, right? And another point that I would like to make is this, is that we see young folk, young white brothers and sisters, engaging in extraordinary work on behalf of the Obama campaign. And I think what they're doing in an interesting sort of way is engaging in a ritual release of the burdens of the past.
Purging themselves of guilt?
Not themselves, but in some significant way, their work environments are more diverse, their social spaces are more diverse, their formation is radically different than the formation of those of us who came up in the culture wars or those who came up in the 60s and 70s. Their reality is different in some significant way, and yet and still their reality is shaped and framed by this ghost, this ghastly burden of race that has defined the nation since its inception. So there's this ritual dimension to the support around Obama that's really important.
Dr. Lifton, want to follow up?
Yeah, I'd like to add something to that also. There's a quality in Obama that hasn't been much spoken of. It's a kind of multiplicity of elements. It's what I call a protean or many-sided style. He has an unusual background that has mystified people, but also adds to his qualities. A black father, white mother, a complicated but interesting family background, living in Hawaii and in Indonesia, an Ivy League education, emerging as a lawyer with great brilliance. All this comes together in an unusual combination that makes him sensitive to many-sided forces in a way that few people are. And it may be very integral to what he's becoming and what he's doing. There's something very unusual about this man. And in terms of his, inability or to show anger because of being the Jackie Robinson of politics, there's something more to that. I think he's temperamentally a kind of mediator, and his impulse is toward inclusiveness. Of course, he's got his anger and he's got his toughness, but he has a temperamental quality that's remarkable and remarkably suited to this moment and to that spirit of inclusiveness.
Yeah, I mean, that's what makes him Jackie Robinson. That's what makes the analogy so appropriate in my view. I think what's striking me about this whole moment, again, there's so much, right? In some ways, I'm so excited, but I'm also so scared.
Of what?
I'm worried that at the same time that we are so excited about the possibility of an African-American president, I'm worried about all those who are caught in the prison industrial complex who are black and brown. I'm worried about all those who are dying of diabetes and cancer, who can't get prenatal care. I'm worried about those who are locked in poor urban schools and poor rural schools, who can't get decent education, so they're being tracked to a certain sector of our economy. We can go down the line to show how racism continues to overdetermine the life possibilities of so many of our fellow Americans. At the same time that that's happening, right, we have this ritual of racial expiation that's taking place for some folks. Mm-hmm. We've entered a post-racial America, and then you have the excitement around the idea of a black president.
So how does Barack Obama govern as president if elected on that tightrope. It's one thing to do it in a campaign where all you have to do is get people to vote for you. That's really the easy part.
Right.
What about avoiding or trying to confront, as a matter of policy, the people in the prison industrial complex, the people with diabetes, et cetera, while still trying to be Jackie Robinson?
Right. This is what's so striking about the campaign to me, Brian. It's been brilliant, but he hasn't taught us. They haven't taught us how to talk about race in the Obama era. Everything has fundamentally changed, but our political lexicon is still stuck, tied to a certain way of doing politics around race. It's going to be different. And so I don't know how he's going to go for it. I'm baffled, actually.
The last word from Cape Cod, Dr. Lifton?
Well, again, I'm enormously hopeful. I'm worried about something else in addition, a kind of far-right backlash, the sense on the part of a bigoted element of the population that it becomes almost intolerable to have a black president. I think he's going to be president, and I think as much as anyone I can imagine, he has the qualities to dampen that sense of potential violence. And I think there's hope in his inclusiveness, because from the beginning of his presidency, he's going to try to include various groups and parties, and in that way govern as an American with black roots and an extraordinary human being.
Well, if the polls are right, we will get to find out. Robert Lifton, thank you so much for joining us via webcam. Eddie Glaude, thank you for coming up from Princeton.
Thank you so much.
Why does the fear of some unknown potential still have such a hold on so many? It's Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. And the outcome of an election depends on who bothers to vote and whether all those votes actually get counted. That's one of the very salient fears right now, voter turnout and fraud. To begin, did you happen to get a video like the one we're about to show in your inbox? It's the video equivalent of those mass mailings with your name printed everywhere to give the impression it's personal. I got one.
U.S. elections are always close, but the nation was shocked Tuesday night to see John McCain defeat Barack Obama by a single vote.
We sure showed them what a comeback looks like.
For many, shock soon turned to outrage as the New York Times revealed the identity of the particular non-voter responsible for Obama's loss. In just a few short days, this private citizen has become a national pariah. Fearing retribution, local police took the non-voter into protective custody yesterday at City Hall. Disgruntled citizens have been demonstrating ever since.
You were supposed to Barack the vote, but what happened? The vote didn't even get Baracked.
I waited in line 5 hours to vote with an arthritic hip, and this mother lazy couldn't get out of bed in time to vote.
International reaction has been just as intense, even in some of the most remote locations.
यो मेरो अनुभवमा यो 2-4 सालभन्दा अहिले 5वटा पक्रिएको थियो.
However, the non-voter has become a hero to a small sliver of the population.
I thank you for your service. I thank you for what you've done for the United States of America.
Bet that guy is a factor viewer. He's also a patriot.
Coming up, how long until we nuke Iran? Experts say it could be as early as Saturday, around lunchtime.
Pretty effective, I think. That's one way to get out the vote. And funny. That was a fake. It wasn't really about me. What's not funny is the prospect of one's vote not getting counted or not being allowed to vote and the election being stolen. Now, is this paranoia or a possibility? Mark Crispin Miller joins us. He's professor of media studies at NYU and author of Loser Take All, Election Fraud and the Subversion of Democracy. Hello.
Hi, Brian.
I hate to even put the first question this way, but in your opinion, is the stealing of this election already underway?
Well, I think that there is definitely an attempt to steal this election that's underway. Already, for example, we've had vote flipping on the machines that are used for voting purposes in West Virginia, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas.
During early voting, this has actually happened?
This has been happening over the last week or so. In every case, except for 3 that are a little bit dubious, the votes have been flipped from Obama to McCain or to Cynthia McKinney. The 3 cases in Tennessee are suspicious because the people who made those calls told the newspaper rather than the Election Commission. Their numbers are unlisted, and they're all part of the family of Republican officials.
The good news, though, is that these instances apparently got discovered. How did they get discovered?
Well, people reported them.
Who?
The people to whom this happened, the people who tried to vote for
It
Obama.
happened in front of their faces in a voting booth?
Yeah, well, yeah, it did. It happened right before their eyes. You know, this happened in about a dozen states 4 years ago.
So that sounds, on the face of it, if it's happening to their eyes, like maybe not fraud or theft, but technological glitch, no?
Well, it would be a technological glitch if it happened, you know, both ways equally, right? If it happens only in one direction, I think what we're talking about is the memory cards having been manipulated to bring this about. And this isn't the only such example that I could invoke. You know, we're talking about a whole lot.
Tell me more.
Well, you know, election theft depends on two categories of activity. We've been talking about election fraud, which has to do with using the electronic systems to rig the voting. And that not only entails using the voting machines in a suspicious way, but the central vote tabulators, the electronic voter rolls, people's names are summarily dropped from the rolls, and so on. That's fraud, and that's largely imperceptible. But there's a whole separate category of activities that involves vote suppression. And this refers to voter purging, what we call voter caging. Caging is when you send targeted voters, Democratic voters, forms in sort of business envelopes, the kind of thing you'd throw away. If people don't take the forms out of the envelopes, fill them out and send them in, their names are stricken from the rolls. There's been tons of vote suppression over the last week.
And there are robocalls that say, if you're a Republican, the election is November 4th. If you're a Democrat, it's November 5th. As a way of people getting to miss it, things like that.
Exactly. That's disinformation. There's a flyer in Virginia that's been sent around that makes that point. It happened 4 years ago. All this stuff happened 4 years ago. It's happening again.
But there is some good news this year, too. For example, coming from Ohio, tell me if you think this is not the case, where there have been a few court cases that have gone the way of more votes counting rather than fewer votes counting. So officials wanted to purge, I think it was 200,000 names of people whose IDs didn't precisely match to the letter what was on the voter registration forms or what was transcribed from the voter registration forms by registration workers. So if, you know, one letter in the first name was different, this kind of thing. The court did not let that attempt stand. Very, very close, almost matches that look like they're the right name. Those people will be allowed to vote. And then just this week, it was ruled that homeless people may list a park bench or a train station, if necessary, as their home. And some people were trying to stop them from voting, correct?
That's absolutely right. There have been a few bright spots in an otherwise rather bleak picture, you know. I think that the most important thing that I can say to you, Brian, is that the larger the turnout, the harder the theft, and there is every indication that the turnout is going to be, and in fact already is, enormous. And I was watching the first half of the show, and I was quite struck by the brilliant conversation between your two guests. But I think it's important to emphasize the fact that Obama seems to be very far ahead. Pew has done exit polls whose results were released late yesterday, which found that in the early voting so far, Obama has a 19-point lead. I actually don't think that there's much risk, and I base this on my conversations with some really respectable pollsters. I don't think it's very likely that McCain could win this race legitimately. I don't think people should be complacent. As I say, I think the turnout should be extremely large, but more importantly, I think people should be prepared to question the result if there is another surprise outcome this time. I think people should not simply accept the Bradley effect or some such tidy rationale to throw up their hands and say, oh, well, we lost. I think that there's good reason to be very, very suspicious. and demand a full accounting.
I think we can take that 19%, however, that split in the early voting numbers as indicative of the population as a whole. These are the people who are enthusiastic enough to go and early vote, and I think the most enthusiastic voters this year are undoubtedly on Obama's side in any numbers. Let me ask you something about your book, in which the title includes the phrase voter fraud.
Election fraud.
Election fraud.
Right.
Which election fraud? Okay, because voter fraud, it's interesting that you make that distinction, because it's usually the conservatives and the Republicans who argue that voter fraud or registration fraud, as in the case of Acorn workers, is a parallel and perhaps equal problem on the other side. Here is a video from Brave New Films reframing the Acorn problem.
They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Another Acorn filled out registration form. It's for Jimmy Johns, 10839 Broadway in Crown Point. Jimmy Johns. We decided to track him down. Here he is.
Here's the basis of the GOP argument. They keep bringing up cards that have been filled out with names like Mickey Mouse. So here's what would have to happen in order for something like that to swing an election. First, the card goes to the Board of Elections, which checks to make sure that Mickey Mouse is a real person. Somehow, if that passes that check, Mickey Mouse has to show up at the polls, often with an ID, especially if they're a first-time voter.
All of them show up, all vote for the same candidate for this to steal an election.
And this has to happen hundreds of thousands of times.
And that is what the GOP is suggesting, and that is a joke.
It is absurd and ridiculous to think that that's what's going on here.
And our research is showing this more looks like a fraud perpetrated on Acorn.
In virtually every case that you've heard about on CNN or Fox News, the cards in question were flagged by us first.
Every time there is a registration that is improperly completed, we proactively flag it, bring it to the attention of the election officials so that they know that we think these cards might be invalid.
Right this way to the voting booth, Mr. Mouse. Obviously, if somebody shows up and the registration is Mickey Mouse, that person is going to get stopped. That video minimizes the Acorn problem, but the reports I've read in the press said 30% of their registrations are being thrown out in some places. Does this not represent a potential attempt to steal the election from the other side?
No, what this video fails to make clear, I don't think Acorn is that good at propaganda.
And that was just an excerpt from the video.
Right,
so.
I understand, but it wasn't sufficiently clear. Acorn has operated under very hostile scrutiny for some time. Republicans have sued them repeatedly and always lost. Because they operate under hostile scrutiny, they themselves have always been very careful to go through the forms that volunteers have filled out, right, and to flag the ones that are dubious and to turn them in. You see, people get paid a couple of bucks a piece to register other voters. These are poor people. So naturally, there's a strong temptation to write Mickey Mouse. It has nothing to do with voter fraud, okay? The fact is that the Republicans using this notion of voter fraud is a way to cloud the issue. If anyone is involved in trying to disenfranchise voters on a massive scale, it is the Republicans. And let me make another point. Voter registration fraud is something that the Republicans have themselves recently gotten into very serious trouble for. Not bogus voter registration fraud, but the real thing. There's a company called Young Political Majors. It was operating in Los Angeles. This was a company that was systematically registering voters as Republicans without their knowledge. The head of this company, Mark Jacoby, was just arrested by the police in California for misregistering himself.
Really?
Yeah. This was in the Los Angeles Times.
Why don't we hear about this on CNN?
Excellent question. Why don't we hear about this on CNN? And that's not the only
and
company.
Maybe we did. I don't watch 24 hours of CNN, so.
Well, I don't either, but I can still tell you that it hasn't been reported on CNN. The fact is that the ones with the biggest megaphone, which is the Republicans, they have Fox News, they have Rush Limbaugh, they have Lou Dobbs, These people have all been screaming about Acorn and Obama, Obama and Acorn and Obama. It's a propaganda drive. Unfortunately, the press is so lazy that they'll simply parrot that rather than actually look around at, say, the Los Angeles Times, HuffPost. They'll find stories of the Republicans committing far more egregious voter registration fraud and election fraud. This whole thing is a distraction, and it doesn't serve the voters of this country very well at all.
Are there any states that you're particularly concerned about for this period between now and Tuesday? Do you have nominees for this year's Florida or Ohio?
Well, I think that all the swing states have to be watched very carefully. And it isn't just between now and Election Day that concerns me. It's the period after Election Day. There are 9 lawsuits now in Ohio, 9, all brought by Republicans, okay? I believe that their legal strategy will probably entail finding some kind of legal argument under Bush v. Gore to get whole classes of votes nullified. It may be early voting. It may be absentee ballots. In other words, ways that Democrats in particular have chosen to vote in the hope that it will prevent their votes from being thrown away, okay, I think may well be tossed. So people have to be very, very watchful after the election and not permit another surprise outcome on a very flimsy basis.
30 seconds. What are the Democratic Party lawyers gearing up to do?
Well, I've heard a lot about the 5,000 Democratic Party lawyers. There's some question as to where exactly they are and what they're doing. I sort of wish the Obama campaign had engaged a team of election integrity activists who have been through this kind of thing before. They haven't. So it's going to be up to the people. It's going to be up to groups like Common Cause and the National Campaign for Fair Elections and others to keep an eye on this situation and try to keep the system as honest as possible.
Mark Crispin-Miller, thank you very much. It may not be over by Tuesday. This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Speaking of bending the rules, back in a minute with an election that is more than a year away. It might be for the Bloomberg third term.
Ma, guess what? I went back to college. No, I didn't quit my job. I'm finishing my degree with the CUNY Online Bachelor's in Business. I interact online with real City University of New York faculty on a schedule that fits my busy life. Ma, you should look who's teaching at CUNY. And it all leads to a high-quality Bachelor of Science degree in business. I can attend class anywhere, anytime. Yes, Mom, even at your house Friday night for dinner.
The CUNY Online Baccalaureate. Get back to business.
Hi, I'm Matthew Goldstein, the Chancellor of the City University of New York. Look who's teaching at CUNY. Michio Kaku, string field theorist and international authority on theoretical physics. John Corleano, Academy Award and Pulitzer Prize winner in music. David Nassau, winner, Bancroft Prize for Best Biography. Jill Barganetti, Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers. Gregory Rabassa, recipient the National Medal of Arts in 2006 from President Bush. Elizabeth Nunez, winner, American Book Award. Godfrey Gums, American Physical Society Fellow and member, New York Academy of Sciences. World-class talent, award-winning scholars, CUNY is their classroom, CUNY is your university.
This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. After much deliberation and who knows what else, the City Council voted narrowly last week to allow Mayor Bloomberg and other officials, like themselves, to run for a third term, extend term limits by 4 years. How exactly did that come about? Has it hurt the popular mayor? Will it? Does his argument for continuity in crisis trump the principles of voters getting the chance to undo a referendum that they originally passed? Clyde Haberman has been furious about this in his New York Times column. Hi, Clyde.
Good evening.
Why is this so important to you?
Well, it's huge. And in fact, it does play off a little bit about what Mark Miller was just saying. We have another case here, retrospectively, of the voters' votes being nullified, in effect. Many people have said we're a representative democracy, which is true. This has been a favorite pitch of former Mayor Koch in terms of supporting what the mayor and the city council president have done together. City council speaker, I mean. And that is true, except our term limits law was not done through representation. It was done by direct ballot twice in the 1990s, as we know, by the voters. It seems to me democracy screams for going back to them to make a change.
Do you support term limits?
No. I personally think term limits are a bad idea for all the reasons that I'm sure you've gone through many times on this show. I also think that if we do have term limits, 3 terms probably do make a lot more sense than 2 terms, especially for the council. That said, once again, those pesky people called voters approve this. You go back to them.
Do you like the idea in general of initiative and referendum?
No, I don't like that either, but it was done. Now, one of the arguments against those two was that a billionaire, Ron Lauder, bankrolled it, and that is true, and one can always make that argument. Well, nobody's got more money, including God, than Michael Bloomberg, and so that if he wanted to have had this referendum, and he could have easily have had it on the Tuesday ballot, except he dithered for months and months on this. It's not like he woke up on September 15th when the stock market began to do its, swan dive, and said, oh, the city needs me. To paraphrase Marshal Pétain, the Vichy government, I offer myself as a gift to France to lessen her misfortune. And Bloomberg is in effect saying the same thing.
There's a difference, though, because all that the voters, all he gets to do is offer himself to the voters. Ultimately, don't the voters have more options this way? Because they can still choose to boot Bloomberg out if they're angry at him for this or anything else.
That is
the other way, they don't have the option of keeping him.
That is one argument. We also get to keep all these other office holders, the 5 borough presidents, the 35 of the 51 who would be term limited next year. The public advocate, if she were to run again, and she says she's not going to, the comptroller. They all get in there. Incumbents are very, very hard to oust. So it's not exactly a level playing field at all. And again, maybe on one level it's increasing choice, except it's also decreasing choice because a lot of people who might have run for these various offices are going to be squeezed out for the reason we just discussed. And again, to me, the choice of on term limits itself trumps the choice of who's going to be on the ballot a year from now. This almost amounts to original sin, one might argue.
I have heard that, and with apologies to all the religious people in the audience, I heard just the other day that the mayor may run, assuming this withstands a court challenge, as a Democrat.
It's always possible. He was once a Democrat, then he became a Republican, now he's an independent. The mayor has what might generously be called a Kleenex approach to party politics. They are to be used and then discarded.
Used and then discarded.
Yeah, less like your tissue. So there's no sense of loyalty. It's all about what will further him. And again, most people feel, I would probably throw myself in that camp too, he's been a good mayor. He seems oblivious to the notion that process counts. That, yes, we're having economic hard times, but that the basics of our democracy are more important. We went through this 7 years ago after 9/11 with attempts to stretch Giuliani's term.
Because in that particular crisis, he was supposed to be the particular
we couldn't do without. We
man.
couldn't do without it. I keep quoting Frenchmen during all of this. Charles de Gaulle's famous line about the graveyards are full of indispensable men. Christine Quinn, when she announced her very much expected support of the mayor on this, the city council speaker was asked, well, what happens if 4 years from now somebody else comes along and says, well, we have another crisis, well, I don't believe that's going to happen, she said. Well, we had it at the end of 2001 with 9/11. We have it now, and we're still a year from the election. We have it now with this fiscal crisis. How many times do we have to see this movie before it qualifies as a repeating and recurring event?
Do you think this issue, as it pertains to his own quest to stay in power, is an anomaly for this mayor? Because his general reputation is that he is sort of a good government guy, that his independence keeps him free of the special interests, whether or not you like the policies that he's pushing.
On one level, yes, but on another level, he doesn't really show great respect for some of the basics of American democracy. His treatment of party politics, as I said, is one example of it. His willingness to shower vast, vast sums and basically bury his opponent in money. You know, when he said after his first election in 2001 that if he had to spend anything like the amount of money that he spent, which was something like $70 million, to get reelected, it would be obscene. And he spent even more, something like $85 million. It seems to me that some editorial board or another might want to consider asking him, as Fritz Schwartz, former corporation counsel, has urged, that to level the playing field and make a fair fight of it, in Fritz's words, that the mayor stick to the campaign finance laws restrictions. But I don't believe that'll happen any more than I'm going to fly tomorrow.
Barack Obama didn't do it when he had the opportunity to get out of the federal equivalent.
Right. But Michael Bloomberg has a track record of not respecting these kinds of bounds. He will do what it takes.
Why defend the political parties? Probably a lot of people think a political party should be treated as a Kleenex, rather than defend the individual who, again, can be judged on his merits, and that the parties are just kind of bureaucratic obstacles.
Lord knows they're imperfect. We can go on forever on that. But they do give you a reasonable guide in certain levels on how candidates and office holders feel on a fairly broad range of issues. It's a very imperfect guide, but it gives you a broad range. Surely an average person running as a Democrat almost anywhere in this country, but especially in New York, you may make assumptions about him or her that are going to be quite different from the assumptions you would make about a Republican.
So maybe next year as a Democrat, maybe in 2013 as a Libertarian, you think?
Why not? Maybe he'll go to the Right to Life party before it's over. Who knows? I mean, maybe he goes through cycles. Maybe he starts as a Democrat, goes to Republican, then goes to an Independent, and then he starts all over again. I don't know.
A perfect circle. The Circle Party.
Yeah.
Clyde Haberman, New York Times columnist. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
And that's it for tonight's show. We're here live Wednesday nights at 7:30, or join the conversation at brianlehrer.tv. Next week, the night after the election, we'll talk about it live. And join me for my daily radio show, weekday mornings at 10 on WNYC. Tomorrow morning, former Mayor Ed Koch calls for the U.S. to stay in Iraq but get out of Afghanistan. That's at 8 on 8:20 a.m. and 93.9 FM, WNYC, tomorrow morning at 10. Have a great night.